Time for your first riddle. Why do you think an Essex sergeant of militia... Haha, they said this would never work. Oh, ye of little faith. Why do you think an Essex sergeant of militia would have been better to have bit his tongue rather than bang on about the price of straw hats to a bunch of bone idle boys who are handcuffed to their hammocks? War, bloody, bitter, and seemingly endless. We fought the Emperor Napoleon for long decades, terrified of being infected by France's revolutionary ideals. But as the war dragged on, our little sceptred isle became awash with French and Dutch prisoners of war, who we packed into crumbling old castles and prison ships, hulks, condemned as unfit for naval service. And still, it wasn't enough. They came up with the idea of the first ever purpose-built prisoner war camp. They sited it in a nice, safe, landlocked location where Ermine Street crosses the Great North Road. And this is it. The depot. It was built at Norman Cross, just outside Peterborough in 1796, and was designed to house more prisoners and guards than the entire population of that nearby town.
When there were insurrections here...
Armed with a painting done by a militia guard of the time, Ben Robinson, field archaeologist from Peterborough Museum, joined me to look for signs of its military past in a field. We're about on the main drag.
That's it. That's the main north-south route through the camp. I think we're round about here, so we've just come down the road there, down from the south gate, the road out to the gate where the market was held is just there to the east. Then we're up there to the north gate, and the A1 is right behind us down there, the Great North Road. So yeah, right in the centre. Again, you get a feel for the sort of space that was enclosed by the centre of the prison from this spot.
How big was this on the ground?
Yeah, it's difficult to get an impression of scale, isn't it? The whole site...
Scale obviously wasn't his strong point, was it?
Not really. It's all about providing a nice visual impression. But the whole site occupied 40-odd acres, around 42 acres, and that was barrack blocks and the site of the prison itself. The prison bit was around 22 acres.
So I'm just working this out. That's about 22 football fields, isn't it?
I'll take your word for it. Sounds about right.
There's about just under 2 to the football field.
Yeah. It's odd to think of 7,000 people being crammed into that sort of space. You know,
not if you're a prison officer.
No.
I think they don't have any problem imagining that. The camp was guarded by regiments of British militia. In the event of a full-scale riot, their artillery inside the blockhouse covered the entire camp. Attempted escapes earned you solitary confinement in the cooler, known affectionately as the Black Hole. But that didn't deter the French and the Dutch from devising an assortment of ingenious escapes.
All the sort of things that we're familiar of in World War II stories, basically, all those kinds of escapes. There were tunnels dug one night towards the Great North Road. Some of those got away, some of them didn't. There's reports of another man escaping in a chest. One night, about 500 prisoners shoulder-barged in sort of rugby style, the palisade.
Wasn't that the following day that the camp commandant indented for 24 pairs of handcuffs to restrain the ringleaders?
Yeah.
So it's the other bit of your riddle, remember? The handcuffs? Sadly, all the depot's wooden buildings have gone, save 2. But the most significant building in the camp has miraculously survived. The house of the agent, or commandant as he became known. Now, the latter-day commandant is Derek Lopez, wonderfully enthusiastic about its history and really keen to know the story behind a plaque that he unearthed while he was converting the stables.
Oh, wow. We found this when we were refurbishing the stable block, and it's the Hansett family. It is a sad story because this family lost their children, and one can only assume it was during the cholera epidemic.
They've lost 3 in the space of
That's right.
2.5 years,
Yeah.
haven't they? Oh, that's awful.
And I know nothing about the Hansard family, and I'd be sort of eternally grateful to anybody who might know any information about this family, so we can sort of trace the history and how they came to be at Norman Cross.
So who was Robert Hanslip, and what was his connection to this place? Well, he wasn't a commandant, and his name doesn't appear anywhere else in the depot records. But hold your heart, he does turn up in a history of the camp. He was the man who covered the pitch pine building with brick and put a new roof on it. When the camp was decommissioned, Hanslip bought his new home at an Army and Navy surplus sale. We found out, Derek, that Robert Hanslip was actually a naval officer. And that, to me, that tweaks the tragedy even more, because 1819, I think it's reasonable to assume he'd served through the whole of the Napoleonic War. And these great victories at sea had cost a lot of lives. So he'd gone through all the savagery of this war, come back, presumably to relax in the bosom of his family, and suddenly, over 2 years, it's all taken away from him.
It's a tragic story, isn't it?
A few miles further south at Yaxley is another memorial to a naval officer. You see, life for the prisoners at the depot really depended on who the Navy appointed to run it. A bad agent and their lives were intolerable. But the prisoners were soldiers and sailors, and they knew a good man when they saw one, even if on paper he was their enemy. In 1811, Le Grand Chapeau, the big hat, was given to Captain John Draper, Royal Navy. And the French very quickly began to appreciate that here was a man who was that rarest of creatures, a manager who really did know his derriere from his elbow. Tragically, he'd only been in the job 18 months when he died. The French were désolés. So much so that at their sole expense, every man jack of them contributed from their meagre funds to place this beautiful memorial here in the church, so that the man's humanity and kindness would never be forgotten. They clearly liked him. These astonishing artifacts show how some of the prisoners stayed sane through their long captivity. They carved pig and cattle bones on a primitive assembly line, the bone idol boys of our riddle. They made finely detailed model ships, jewelry boxes, even grisly guillotines complete with victims. And they sold them to civilians at their weekly market. But the inmates had a profitable black market too, plaiting the milliner's straw used in fashionable hats. It severely damaged local livelihoods, so it was declared illegal in the camp, which brings us to the sergeant of the riddle. The authorities were determined that they were going to stamp out this illicit trade. But there were loads of people, as you'd imagine, who had a vested interest in it, and they were every bit as determined that they weren't. The French had a particular problem. The camp sergeant, I don't mean camp as in dancing down the other end of the ballroom, he just worked there. The French felt he was overzealous. They would have cheerfully throttled him, but in the camp, he was untouchable. Fortunately, they had plenty of colleagues outside, Englishmen, loyal subjects of King George, who were more than willing to help out. One night, when he was on his way back to the camp from Stilton, they ambushed him. I'd like to think that he had a skinful on board from one of these inns, because they held him down And to make sure he got the point about keeping his trap shut, they cut a large slice out of his tongue. When the Treaty of Amiens ended the war, the depot was deemed surplus to requirements and went for auction. But it was hurriedly withdrawn when the French recommenced hostilities, and it was another 11 years before victory at Waterloo finally persuaded the authorities that it was safe to flog it off. God save us. England in summer. Do you remember, in the riddle, I said about doing bird? Well, it wasn't the usual thing about prisoners being banged up in jail. It was a sneaky way of getting this bit in. The bronze eagle that sat on top of this column for nearly 100 years. It was put here just before the First World War to commemorate all those poor soldiers who never went home to France and Holland once the wars were over, the ones who died here. Unfortunately, in 1990, someone feeling bloke had the bird away. It was never seen again. Of course, I don't actually reckon it was stolen. I think the bird had just had enough of this weather. I think it went south to find something nicer. Do-de-do-do-de-do-de-do-de-do-do. Je suis chanson en pleurs. Je suis chanson en pleurs. I hate that Lawrence Llewellyn Bowen, you know. I mean, any bloke who's got a head of hair and a waistline, I'm going to be a bit dodgy about, aren't I? You can understand that. But nobody, I mean nobody, should have a right to look that good in a plunk of velvet suit. I'd do anything to be able to wear a velvet suit. Except diet and exercise, of course. Anyway, while we're on the subject of sumptuous and spectacular interior decoration, what is it about Longthorpe Tower that had turned me so beastly about poor old Lawrence? Well, believe it or not, but just off the Peterborough Ring Road are the remarkable remains of a world-class chunk of history. You won't find anything like this anywhere else in Great Britain. In fact, I'm fairly sure you'd look long and hard across the whole of Europe to find its like. What I do know is that I came here years ago and the place was packed out with a whole load of art historians who'd come from St. Petersburg, from the Ermine Museum, all the way from Russia, just to look at these wall paintings. Why would they do that? Okay, so the paintwork is a bit faded and parts of the pictures are missing, I know. Yes, their vibrant glowing colours have been flaked away by centuries of whitewash, But look, this is really, really special. You'd normally only see this kind of stuff surviving in a church, not in somebody's home. Coming here, you can see how a wealthy man who had good taste and was willing to spend money on the best materials and the best artists to work with those materials. You can see how he decorated his front room. We think Mr. L.L. Bowen's medieval ancestor was commissioned to do the house by its wealthy owner, Robert de Thorpe. His designs included a popular motif, the Great Wheel of the Five Senses, with its monkey, its vulture, spider's webs, and boar and cockerel. But one of the biggest influences on the overall design, after the usual sermons and improving tales of saints and sinners, were the very popular but very rare books known as bestiaries, picture books of wild animals. When it came to introducing you to the lives of the beasts of other continents, bestiaries weren't entirely reliable. Survival, they weren't. They would often slip in mythical beasts along with the real ones, so you never knew quite whether you were coming or going. This one is a particular favourite of Aristotle's, the bonacon or bonacon. I'm not sure, my French is almost as bad as my Greek, so you'll have to choose. What you need to remember about this little fella is that if you find yourself hunting him on the plains of Africa, remember to keep well clear of his hind quarters. Up the front, his horns curled harmlessly inward, but that wasn't the bit you had to worry about. When threatened, the bonacon's beastly bottom gushed forth humongous gouts of noxious gases that set trees ablaze and shrivel the hairs off your hunting dogs. Now, Gertie the goose and I have got a nice little riddle for you. Why do you think a peer of the realm would have put down good money on the Scots having a real beef at the thought of Germans goose-stepping their way through London? They're never going to get that one, you know. From, say, the 1600s to the 1850s, who do you think was the most important long-distance traveller on the roads of Great Britain? I'll give you a clue. These guys had to be licensed, okay? They had a little metal plate on their arm, and in order to get that, they had to be over 30, they had to be married, and they also had to be of good character, and ideally a householder. They also had to be reliable with animals, and they also had to be utterly trustworthy with large sums of hard cash. Have you got it yet? The answer's simple. The cattle drover. Come on, horseradish, come on, cush! Cush, cush! Come on, Yorkshire pudding, cush! Long before refrigerated trucks and trains, every year on a route that became known as the Bullock Road, an army of Scottish drovers came south, driving huge herds of Scotch beef. Cush, cush, cush! Well, that's one bit of your riddle answered. But it wasn't just cattle that made the long trek south to the London meat markets. With a short sidetrack to a Norfolk church, I'll put you in the picture, so to speak. One of the things that was driven to London in droves was what East Anglia was really famous for back in those days. It's geese and it's turkeys. And here, in the churchyard of Ashby St Mary in Norfolk, you've got a wonderful and very rare memento of those events. The grave of Anne and George Basie, the breeder of fine, plump Norfolk turkeys and beautifully well-fattened Norfolk geese. And together, they drove them to the Michaelmas Fair in London. Thinking aloud, I innocently wondered how difficult it was to drive geese and turkeys on foot. I should have known better, really. Things like that come back to haunt me. Here's another every expense spared reconstruction, aided and abetted by 2 Peters and a non-equity gaggle of geese. Some of these flocks were anything up to 2,000 birds.
Yeah.
I mean, how really difficult would that be to
Very.
keep them together?
The thing about it is they all would more or less stay together unless one of them decided to take to his wings and say goodbye.
Really?
Then that would really upset the geese.
What sort of distance would they cover in a day, do you reckon? And I've read 10 miles. Is that realistic?
I would think that was possible.
I know cush and come by for the cows. What do I use for these?
Well, I don't know of any particular word. They don't often get driven about. How do you call your geese?
Well, they generally come where we feed them. That's
Yes.
the thing of it.
See, they don't go by any sound,
they
they
don't
just know
really-
by your
yeah.
food. Yeah.
They come to food, you see, that's the main thing.
So if I make a noise like a sack of grain, we'll be all right.
Yes, you'll keep them all together.
You
all
rattle,
together.
you rattle
Yes.
the pail, that'll attract them.
Yes, they'll soon come to that.
Yeah.
Let's take these geese to Smithfield. Well, there we go. Only 109 more miles to go.
That's all. That isn't bad.
All right, me and the Peters aren't going all the way to London because we don't have the right shoes. I don't mean us, you silly goose. I mean shoes for the geese. You see, drovers protected the feet of the geese by walking them through tar and then through gravel to make an asphalt shoe. Afternoon, Ma'am.
Afternoon.
You'd think I'd know by now, wouldn't you? I made the mistake of wondering about that too. Hey-ho. Oh well, at least I won't have to spell out the goose-stepping bit of the riddle. But why were they Germans goose-stepping through London? Easy. Our geese drovers were from Norfolk, descendants of the Anglo-Saxons, Germans. It's good fire, isn't it?
Ideal.
Which just leaves us the last bit of the riddle, the gambling Earl. A chap called Lord Orford. This would be about 1740. Big betting man. Put loads of money on, raindrops down window panes, all that sort of stuff.
Quite.
Him and the Marquis of Queensberry, you know, the guy who, well, the boxing rules. His grandfather, I think. Anyway, the pair of them had a bet. Now, this was for 100 guineas, if I remember rightly. It's a lot of money in those days. And this bet was that a flock of geese could get to London faster than a flock of turkeys. Well, Orford had the money on the geese. And of course, he actually won by something in the region of 2 days.
Really?
Yeah, and they reckon it was because every night the turkeys would roost. And it took them longer to get them moving in the morning.
Quite, yes, yes.
So they lost that time.
Mm.
So there you are, good bit of information. If anyone ever comes up to you in a pub and says, I'll tell you what, I'll have a bet with you on geese and turkeys going to London. The safe money's on the geese.
The safe money's on.